Okay, so as always, we like to say on the podcast, when you get the opportunity to talk to an expert, former player, and current analyst around the NBA, you jump at that opportunity. We're, of course, very excited to welcome back in now for the second time on the podcast, Antonio Daniels, covering the Pelicans as a color analyst, also host on Sirius XM NBA, in addition to being a 13-year champion NBA veteran. Antonio, thanks for some additional time.
Oh, for sure. I wonder where these questions are going to go today. I
Well,
wonder.
what I will say is, before we dive in on the inevitable Kyrie, just from covering the NBA,
Mhm.
especially during the offseason, do you find conversations around will he opt in, will he opt out, who's staying, who's going, some of the bigger names, do you find that to be laborsome to discuss as opposed to sometimes what are the coaching staff changes going to be for a particular team? How are they going to fill out the roster? How do they shift expectations from back end playoff to real contender? Are there areas that you prefer to cover and discuss, especially in the offseason?
Well, when you start talking about opt in and opt outs, I think a lot of times, especially when you're talking about stars that have had questionable seasons, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think there's much to discuss. You know what I mean? Whether or not Kyrie Irving was going to opt in or not, I don't think that was ever a question. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't think that was ever a question. Whether or not Russell Westbrook was ever going to opt in, I don't think that was ever a question. So when you're talking about stars where they have 37 to $47 million to opt into, and they're both coming off of quote unquote questionable years, I don't think that, but there's not much to discuss there.
Right.
I think the biggest surprise for me would have been if Kyrie Irving opted out and then chose to test free agency. Because some of the teams on his quote unquote wish list didn't have the financial flexibility to even come close to $37 million per season. The Lakers, they could offer him $6 million. Basically, what that means, if he opts out of 37 and signs for six, I'm not a math major, but that's leaving $31 million on the table after losing $17 million this past year. So I think certain things were kind of a given.
And on that topic, Kyrie Irving obviously does opt into it. Now we got more information that he was first given permission to seek a sign and trade. The market was relatively bare, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
Opportunities with the Lakers were not going to be an option from a Brooklyn Nets organization standpoint. They didn't want to take on $47 million of Russell Westbrook and whatever else may have come their way. But we also got a little bit of insight around what was being discussed internally between the Nets and Kyrie Irving. When you hear that the Nets had a 2-year max offer on the table and also a 2-year max offer with the ability for the third and fourth years to kick in based on some game check marks that needed to be taken care of from Kyrie Irving, are you surprised that Kyrie stayed away from that opportunity? Does that feel reasonable, as I know we spoke last time, from the Nets organizational side?
Well, the thing I feel like, am I surprised that he stayed away from that? No, because he's kind of made it clear that he wants that 5 year.
Yeah.
I get it. I get it. It's security. You want that 5 years of security. The player's job is to approach it with a business mindset, to do what's in your best interest. But it's also the organization's job to approach it the same way with a business mindset and to do what's in their best interest. I thought what the Brooklyn Nets offered was fair. I thought it was fair. Kyrie Irving, over the last 3 seasons, has played about 34, 35 games per season. That can't go ignored. Like we have to be realistic here. Again, to go back to the conversation we had before, we're not talking about skill set.
Right.
We're not talking about talent. We are simply talking about availability. We are talking about games being played. And if I am the Brooklyn Nets, I feel like I have to take that into consideration. I have to. Again, if Kyrie Irving's playing 65, 70 games, this is not even the conversation.
Right.
Sean Marks and the Brooklyn Nets, they roll out the red carpet, first day of free agency, 5 year max offer. Let's wipe our hands, let's move on. But that's not where they are. And when it becomes a stare down where Kyrie Irving wants a long term deal, so he's covering himself. The Brooklyn Nets don't want to give him a long term deal. So they're covering themselves. There has to be some sort of compromise.
And in that regard, it seems like this was the pause button being pushed, right? We can
Mhm.
continue to have discussions around an extension. We can also, I think, for both sides, see how the beginning of this season, as we've discussed on the podcast. Remember, Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant have never been on the court together. That can be a dynamic trio and they can fill out around them, but we don't know yet. So when you look now at this offseason ahead for Brooklyn, what do you think they need to accomplish here? Nicholas Claxton is a guy who they can come back with, restricted free
Mhm.
agent, unrestricted free agent, and Bruce Brown is for the most part standing pat with the pieces that they've had in place these last couple of seasons a viable option, or do they need to look at the landscape and say, how do we do something here to secure what feels like should be a championship caliber season, something that has been discussed and yet never achieved over these last few seasons?
You know what's always difficult is the moving moving ahead, right? And talking about what can we add to a team that you have no idea what they look like whole and healthy. You know what I mean? So it wasn't just a Kyrie Irving and a vaccination situation last year. You lost one of the best shooters in the league in Joe Harris.
Yep.
So imagine what that does as far as giving space and opportunity to Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. There's no more valued asset in today's NBA than shooting. Look at what Joe Harris got contractually. Look at what Davis Bertans got. Look at what Duncan Robinson got. Teams want knockdown shooters because it gives their stars an opportunity to have space, right? So now you remove him from the equation. That hurts. That hurts. Ben Simmons didn't play one game last year. So for me, I don't think the changes for the Nets, and this is for me, I don't think the changes for the Nets need to be drastic. I don't. We had this discussion today on our SiriusXM show. I have the Brooklyn Nets right now, if they came back as currently constructed, right under Milwaukee, if not even with Milwaukee for being the top team in the Eastern Conference. Because you know what? They have two of the most skilled players to ever play the sport. And Kevin Durant, in my opinion, is still the best player in the NBA. He is
Yes.
the best player on the planet. With all that being said, you need Joe Harris. You need Nicholas Claxton. You need Edwards. You need guys like Bruce Brown. You need everybody to play their role. Seth Curry's ability to shoot, Patty Mills' ability to shoot. I like the way Brooklyn is currently constructed. With all that being said, injuries, physical and mental availability is incredibly important for this team to reach their peak.
And you mentioned Seth Curry. That contract is obviously, we talk about surrounding your best players with shooters, right? That's why his contract looks like such a value right now and something they were able to spend a portion of the
Mm-hmm.
Spencer Dinwiddie TPE on to offset some of that coming in from Philadelphia. You mentioned the health and the concerns. I'll frame this last question kind of inside of two parts. At the trade deadline of the upcoming season, the Brooklyn Nets are what? Are they maybe fielding offers for Kyrie Irving services? They are a healthy team over the start of the year and as strong as we've ever hoped they could be, and a dominant force in the Eastern Conference, right there with the Milwaukee Bucks. With some of those uncertainties you mentioned, do you think this team does get on track? And
I do.
are those health questions okay to live with going into the season around certain players?
Well, I think that the health questions and concerns are valid. They're warranted because of what these last three seasons have looked like. But we also have to understand there are certain things that have happened over the past couple of years that are unprecedented.
Yep.
You know what I mean? When you look at COVID and when you look at the situation that transpired on January 6th at the Capitol, the reason that's important is because that chose, or Kyrie Irving chose from that particular situation to take a hiatus right after. You know what I mean? So there are a couple unprecedented things that have happened over the past 2 or 3 years that have led to absences. Now, I'll say this, though. I'm going to tell you one thing I've learned about this league and players in this league. When it's free agent time, the mentality and approach is different. It's different. This is a redemption opportunity year for Kyrie Irving.
Mm-hmm.
So do I think, understand, all eyes are on him, not just meaning fans and analysts and talking heads. I mean, other teams. Because the fact
Yeah.
of the matter is, after this season, he becomes an unrestricted free agent. Every time you take the floor, you are not just auditioning for the team you are playing for, you are auditioning for the other 29 teams as well. So this is a big time redemption year and redemption opportunity for Kyrie Irving. I do think, and we can have this conversation come then. I do think when we start talking about All-Star break, that this team will be sitting at top the Eastern Conference.
Gosh, for Brooklyn Nets fans everywhere, that would be just about as perfect of an all-star break as you could possibly ask for. Antonio Daniels, as we always say, insightful, incredibly knowledgeable around the game. We appreciate a few minutes of your time, and hopefully we'll be catching up down the road talking about expectations for a title for the Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, Ben Simmons led Brooklyn Nets. Thanks again, Antonio.
For sure, always. Thanks for having me, brother.